See, that's the thing.
I completely forgot that Arlovsky-Struve happened.
Right? What even happened in that fight?
Arlovsky took him down a bunch of times, didn't he?
Yeah, apparently. I also 100% forgot that happened. I was just looking at the card. I was like, okay, he beat Junior Albini. He looked surprisingly good.
Yeah, I remembered that.
I know something happened after that, but...
The only thing I remember about Tai Tuivasa is him knocking the fuck out of Cyril Asker and Angela Hill's tweet about Cyril Asker looking like the blacksmith from a medieval RPG.
That is so good.
It's an A+ tweet. I'm gonna dig that one out for upcoming events. She is really fucking funny.
That's a much better gag than Cyril Asker looking like me, which he clearly does not. I can't imagine why anyone would say that. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and today we are very excited to finally be talking about UFC 225, the event we've been holding out hope for and holding on to in our thoughts through this very difficult, very, lackluster spring season of UFC fights. 225, maybe because of how relatively weak the schedule has been leading up to it, feels like a very strong card. Almost every single fight on here is interesting, and of course it goes without saying, the main event, a rematch of a fight that both Pat and I just sort of gushed over when it first happened. That's Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero for the middleweight title, is extremely interesting because, again, these are two of the best, not only middleweights, but two of the best MMA fighters in the world going at it for the second time. So I'm very much hyped for that.
I think also fair to say two of our favorite fighters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Two of the guys that we have both had our eyes on for a long time, like well before they came to their current prominence, I think. Two ridiculous athletes, two fighters with incredibly diverse skill sets, just both must-see kind of talents when it comes to MMA. And we're going to talk about that. In addition, we're going to cover most of what else interests us on the card. That means the co-main event, a welterweight fight between former lightweight champ Rafael dos Anjos and Colby Covington. That should be fun. And should be, hopefully, for at least some people, satisfying in how it concludes. We're also going to look at, we might edit this later, Pat, but we're going to look at Holm, Megan Anderson, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just found out while studying footage, like I think I knew this before, but my brain had lovingly prevented me from really knowing it, but it's Megan Anderson.
What the?
It's
Megan, I heard that on the stream for Invicta when I was watching some tape for this, and I just got to say, man, what the fuck?
It's like... Okay, so Holm, Megan Anderson, we're going to talk about that as well. Alistair Overeem versus Curtis Blades, and a couple others on this card as well. As I said, it's pretty much all worth seeing, except for literally two of the fights, and the UFC has conveniently put those two fights right next to one another. So you can go ahead and figure out for yourself which ones don't deserve watching as much as the others. But let's go ahead and jump in on the main event. Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero. We loved this fight the first time it happened, Pat. I've rewatched this one, it feels like a dozen times at this point for various pieces of analysis and research, and every time I enjoy it. It's not a crazy action-packed kind of fight. It was a thoughtful sort of style matchup. Both guys knew that the other could answer a lot of the questions they would normally smash the typical opponent with, but it was so fun to watch these guys playing high stakes chess with each other. I'm really looking forward to seeing it again.
It was really kind of an interesting contrast with the much more like activity filled fights that we're used to seeing these days. Mm-hmm. It was a throwback in terms of pace, but not a throwback in terms of technique.
Yeah, not at all.
It was, you know what this fight kind of reminded me of was Jose Aldo versus Frankie Edgar 1. Very similar kind of paced fight, very similar kinds of dynamics in terms of what the guys needed to do. I thought it was just really, really interesting, and like a reminder that fights don't have to feature guys throwing 40 strikes a minute in order to be really kind of compelling. This is one of my favorite fights I've ever seen live, and I've seen some bangers live.
Yeah, and it's not a banger. I can't even exactly say why it has stuck out in my head so much. Obviously, the fact that Whittaker, his leg exploded 30 seconds into the fight, and he still managed to fight it out and win is really important. The wrestling, the strike, these guys match up so well in every single area. It's the rare pair of fighters, like Tyron Woodley and Stephen Thompson, where they have the ability to neutralize one another almost completely, but neither of them wants to neutralize the other. They want to do something about their understanding of the other guy's game.
When you get the kind of neutralizer matchup, they can just neutralize each other, or they can use that as a spur to drive them on to whatever the next thing they're going to try is. And that's what we saw here. We saw lots of layers. We saw an exceptionally high levels of skill and types of skill that matched up really well with one another. And we saw the mental processes behind both guys actively trying to figure one another out with the goal of finishing the fucking fight.
Yeah, I love that dynamic, and it feels especially interesting in this matchup. Let's go ahead and talk just sort of briefly about each guy individually. Let's sort of bring their narratives into this matchup, and of course we can talk about how the last fight played out, and that is going to undoubtedly influence how we view this fight. So why don't we start with the champ, since we have talked about Yoel Romero more recently, since Whittaker's been out for over a year now. The style of Robert Whittaker, what makes it so unique? How does he stand out as a fighter?
So I think it's his speed and his command of angles, really. I would say, I guess, connected to that, the baseline thing more than his angles is his footwork. So Whittaker is exceptionally quick and does a great job of picking and choosing the ways in which he gets in and out of range. He's kind of a boxer puncher, but I think he's kind of settled into being more of an outfighter at 185 pounds, where he is really all about picking and choosing the range at which the fight takes place. He's the one who picks and chooses the engagement. He can stick and move at range, or he can kind of play matador as necessary, or he can blitz. He can pick his spots to get in and out of range, land a couple of shots, and then get out on a different angle. It's very hard to pin him against the fence. He combines that with some of the very best takedown defense we've ever seen. It's right up there with 2014 Robbie Lawler and basically any phase of Jose Aldo. I think he's that good as a defender of takedowns.
Watching him force scrambles on Yoel Romero and consistently be denied, but continually use the space created by the scramble to try something else and just push. There's not a lot of people in MMA who can stop Yoel Romero who can out-chain wrestle Yoel Romero. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The key to great takedown defense is to never let your momentum stop.
Right.
That's the key. That is the thing that unites every great defender of takedowns that we've ever seen in MMA, is just to never let your momentum get stopped. And Whittaker, I think, does that even better than Aldo in terms of just never letting his hips get controlled. So you may be in on the next move in your chain as you're trying to get him down, but you do not have his hips. You never have Whittaker's hips. Right? He is constantly finding ways to create space and get his hips back and get his hips away and keep moving.
Just going to try to ignore the fact that you said he's better than Aldo and move on.
Honestly, I think in terms of the level of wrestler that he's shucking off at this point in his career, I would say he's comparable, if not better.
He's definitely comparable. Yeah, I don't feel any shame in putting him in the same category at the very least. You watch Jose Aldo stuff takedowns from guys like Chad Mendes and Frankie Edgar, it compares very favorably to Whittaker stuffing the shots from Yoel Romero, no doubt. The in-out thing that you talked about, I think it's kind of interesting. I don't know if this parallel is really worth drawing, but Whittaker kind of fights like Stephen Thompson now after being beaten by him. It's like, I think I don't know if he found that because of how effective Stephen Thompson was against him, Rather, I think he sort of stumbled on this current style because it works so well in this division. But he does, like, he's very much a pick your spot kind of fighter, constantly needling you. And then every once in a while, not in the way a boxer puncher typically does, he's not looking for a fight usually. Every once in a while, though, he will just blitz you. He'll put together 3 or 4 nasty shots in a row. I don't know. I think it's a really effective way of controlling his opponent's tempo and enforcing the sort of methodical pot-shotting fight that he usually wants.
Yeah, the thing that's wild to me about Whittaker's game is you would expect him to be a very slow-paced fighter, and he's not. And it's because he throws in combination, and it's because when he decides he's going to throw, he can put together 3, 4, 5 shots in quick succession. Mm-hmm. So there's always activity backing up his command of the range. So he's picking and choosing the range. He's doing a great job of controlling it, both with his feet and with strikes. And then when he gets his opportunities, he is really throwing. You know, mm-hmm. He's throwing with power, he's throwing with technique, and he's throwing with volume. When he decides he's going to commit, when he feels like it's safe and necessary to do so. He's not afraid to take risks, while at the same time doing a good job of creating a strategic context in which he is not in tremendous danger.
And I think that does come back to the footwork. It was the first thing you mentioned, the angles of Robert Whittaker. That was the thing that really stood out to me this most recent time of like studying the skills he's used to dominate his middleweight competition. He's got very efficient footwork. It's not like he likes to bounce around sometimes, and I want to talk about his rhythmic tricks as well, because we often talk about Romero in that regard, and Whittaker uses his footwork and his bouncing to play some really nasty tricks on his opponents. But he pivots so often without even seeming to really move his feet. He just sort of slides around people. And I love the way that he does this off of his punches. Like, obviously the jab is the key to Whittaker's success at long range. It's the punch he throws most often. And he's got a really tricky way of throwing it from really low at his hip and taking
very much an up jab kind of guy.
Yeah. But I love the way that he will, from an almost side-on stance, he'll step in with this long spearing jab, and it's as easy as then just sort of repositioning the right foot after the step. So he doesn't have to retreat. He's still in range, but now he has slightly shifted his angle, so the guy he just hit is no longer facing him, and now they have to adjust.
Yeah, so he is offline for the counter that might come, while still remaining in range to throw 2 or 3 more shots if he wants to.
Yeah, and it makes it look – it's like when you watch like a remarkably good guitarist, like somebody who's shredding on their instrument, and you marvel at how relaxed their hands and arms are, that they're not forcing this. It doesn't take a great deal of effort. They're just moving very, very quickly with utmost ease. And that's how Whittaker's – like that's the feeling Whittaker's footwork gives me, is that it's so smooth and easy for him. He's not jumping to an angle. It's a part of the punch. When you jab, you pivot to the side, and then you wait and see. Is the guy going to turn to face you? Okay, hit him again. Is he going to swing without adjusting his position? Okay, maybe you move your head, whatever. But he's so easy about it, you know. Everything's just very deliberate.
It's one of the things that's really fascinating about this matchup is his footwork is very similar to Yoel Romero's footwork in terms of the sheer ease with which they carry things off. Like, true. And just in terms of never doing more than they have to. Right? Like one of the keys to really tremendously great footwork is that you don't take steps you don't need to take. You're anticipating what you're going to need to do, and you're moving the smallest amount possible to do what you want to do with it. Mm-hmm. Right? Both Whittaker and Romero are very much like that in terms of the way that they move without seeming to move. And in terms of just general spatial awareness, like not to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but they're both exceptionally aware of where they are relative to the fence and where their opponent is relative to the fence. True. And where they want to be relative to the fence. Right. So they're both very good at using that combination of very short, very efficient steps in order to maintain that.
I mean, really, they both strike you as very thoughtful fighters, don't they? Like,
exceptionally so.
Yeah. They're aware is a very good way to describe them. Well, let's talk about Romero then. Do I want to talk about Whittaker's rhythm? I mean, how much time do we have? There are so many things.
But I think this is the point where we can bring it together, yes. Where we can bring the two fighters together. both individually and then move from that into the matchup, is the thing that stands out the most about Romero is his rhythm.
Yeah.
Right. It's his understanding. And that's why, in hindsight, we should have seen how brutal a matchup he was for Rockhold, because Rockhold is very much a very kind of a rote guy. Mm-hmm. And everything is very much one speed. He's very kind of standard. And we should have seen that as just catnip for Romero, that eventually at some point it was a given that he was going to catch Rockhold. I think we both picked him, didn't we?
Did we both pick Rockhold?
I think we both picked Romero.
I thought so.
Yeah. But I think that's exactly why we picked him. And I think we were more or less right about that, is that what Romero feasts on is guys who don't understand his ability to change speeds, who can't adapt to his ability to change speeds and change angles, and to get that sometimes he's going to throw things half speed at you, and then he's just going to uncork something full speed and full power, and he's going to play with that. He's going to play with that dynamic over the course of the fight in a bunch of different ways. He's going to play with it on his level changes. He's turned into a really great counterpuncher, which makes use of his rhythm. He throws a really sharp and nasty jab, again, that plays off of that rhythm that he can set. And so that's also why Whittaker is such a tremendously difficult matchup for Romero, is because Whittaker understands rhythm every bit as well as Romero does, and manipulates and plays with rhythm every bit as well as Romero does.
Right. I know it was it wasn't the prettiest performance ever, but I just rewatched Whittaker's fight with Derek Brunson, and like Whittaker looked a little messy. He was under serious duress, because it is very rare that a professional fighter approaches you the way that Derek Brunson tried to approach Whittaker in that fight. But I was just sort of marveling at the trickiness with which Whittaker finds interesting ways and times of setting his feet when he's being attacked. I love this because Romero's rhythm is like it becomes a problem for you that you really have to deal with, in part because just as Whittaker has become like a more comfortable outfighter over time, it seems like Romero is becoming a more comfortable pressure fighter. That he gives you things to look at, and otherwise it's like a fairly close fight. And that's the interesting thing here, is I don't think Romero could successfully play a long-range, slow fight with Whittaker the way he did against, like, Lyoto Machida, where he can't afford to give up that time, because Whittaker makes you deal with his rhythm changes in open space the same way Romero makes you deal with his rhythm changes when he's backing you up. When Romero's in your face, he's giving you feints, he's giving you a lot of stuff to deal with. Whittaker is not so much a, like, you're constantly worried, I'm putting huge heat on every shot kind of fighter. Instead, it's like, if you are trying to get after Robert Whittaker, you don't know when he's going to sting you. When is he moving away, and when is he leaping back in? When is he moving this way or that way? It's these quick little changes where he seems to be reacting to you, and then suddenly you fall into a trap, because he has tricked you with his rhythmic changes. Yeah,
he draws you onto things.
Yes.
He uses those changes in rhythm to manipulate the directionality of your movement, and to pull you into the kind of open space fight that he wants. This brings us to a couple of different things about Romero, I think, and about this matchup in general. Is one of the really underrated things about Romero is his versatility. That he can do a lot of different things because he has these baseline skill sets and this baseline ability to A, explode, and B, manipulate rhythm, right? Like, it's not enough to be a really fast guy. You have to mix that up in really interesting ways, and that's what Romero does. It's not enough to be a really heavy puncher. You need to be able to hit takedowns too. If you're going to kind of play this slow-paced, explosive game that Romero wants to play, you need to have all of these different tools to allow you to do that. And Romero, over the years, has developed them. Like, every single fight, he shows off a new layer. He shows off something that you didn't know that he could do beforehand.
That's true.
First it was kind of his kicks, and then it was, oh shit, he's going to wrestle again, and then it was this kind of really striking rhythm manipulation and these vicious knees, and then it was, and then in this last fight it was the jab. Like, who knew that Yoel Romero had that kind of a jab in his back pocket? Just sitting there, ready to go.
The jab and, like, the pocket counterpunching, where, like, Romero... I mean, this Luke Rockhold fight was really, I think, Romero's best showing of boxing ability. He's had plenty of flashes of good boxing in past fights, but you always get the feeling watching Romero that he is so athletically gifted that at times he just does not care about doing things in what, a trainer would consider the proper way. He just doesn't give a shit. He just kind of plays around. The Rockhold fight was like, I don't know, it would look like a really disciplined boxing performance from Romero.
It made you realize that, that was probably stuff that he always could have done if he'd wanted to.
Yeah, but I think the really important thing I gather from that, relevant to this matchup, is that that's sort of the skill set that gives you more longevity as a fighter, that allows you to keep from gassing out, which was an issue in the first fight with Whittaker. I mean, Romero was still selling out in the 5th round of their fight, but it was clear by the end that Whittaker was just the little bit fresher than Romero, enough that it made a significant difference, I think, especially when it comes to stuffing takedowns down the stretch. And what I liked about Romero's performance against Rockhold is it looked like the kind of performance he could have maintained for 2 more rounds after he finished him. He was putting a lot on his punches, but they were more efficiently thrown, and he was picking his shots a little more carefully. He was using that jab that we hadn't seen enough of before to make sure he was at the proper distance, so he didn't have to rely over much on exploding or using his athletic ability to make up the difference.
Yeah, I really liked what you said there in terms of that being the performance that pointed to longevity. Because I think that Romero is at the stage of his career where we've seen constant evolution from him over the years, and he's going to need to evolve a little more to kind of stay at this top level. It's remarkable that he's as good as he is and still evolving into his
41.
40s. I mean, ageless wonder over here.
He's 41 years old. How is that possible?
It's pretty crazy. But, you're going to need to evolve. And I'm glad you pointed to the counterpunching, because you're right. That's where we've seen the biggest improvements in his game, and he's been showing flashes of that for a couple of years now. We first saw that in the Chris Weidman fight, where he landed this, you had to watch it on slow-mo. It was so fast, where Weidman threw a jab, and then Romero kind of cuts an angle to the outside, throws this lightning fast left-hand counter, and then ducks under and hits a takedown. And it all happens it's such a quick sequence that you literally have to watch it on slow motion to even see the counter left. And so I remember noticing it then and thinking, oh, that seems worrisome for future opponents of Yoel Romero, that he can do that now. And then he did a bunch of counterpunching in the Whittaker fight, and he looked good. And then in the Rockhold fight, he looked real sharp with his counters.
I like the idea that when you see Yoel Romero do something good and effective, your reaction is immediately, this is worrisome. How will the world answer this new threat?
Yeah, you see him do these things. What's striking about Romero is that you see these flashes over the course of his career, and then you see how he's employing them 2 or 3 fights down the road. Everything builds, and he just seems to retain these skill sets that he picks up kind of at random over the years, and then they turn into a really efficient, coherent whole as time goes on.
Yeah. So the matchup. I mean, the first fight played out the way it did. There was a knee injury early on, which did affect the proceedings, I think. But I think that probably does clue us into how Romero might approach this one and try to build off of that. What are the key dynamics? I mean, we've already addressed what the key dynamics are. How do you see this fight playing out?
So I want to talk about their first fight just real quick a little more, because I think that Romero correctly figured out the dynamic, which is that you do not chase Robert Whittaker. You want to let him come to you, and then you want to have answers for him when he comes in. And I thought Romero very intelligently planned the correct answers to what Whittaker was going to try to do. So we saw the counterpunching. Above all, we saw the reactive takedowns. I think that was what Romero thought in his mind was going to be the key. He was going to kick with Whittaker at long range, force Whittaker to come in on him rather than chasing and allowing Whittaker to get his kind of stick and move and counter game off. And then when Whittaker comes in, that's when you want to scare him off. right? You're going to scare him off with counters and you're going to scare him off with takedowns. And
Sure.
if you can control him, great. But if not, you're going to make him pick and choose his spots to come in, and you're going to give yourself the opportunities to land your big shot. I thought that was a really, really smart and kind of objectively correct way for Romero to approach Whittaker. Now, the problem is it didn't work. It didn't work even against a Whittaker who injured his knee.
Right.
So you're going to need some different answers. Do you have some ideas about what might be a different answer here?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is, I agree with you, like, that is objectively a reasonable way of approaching Robert Whittaker. You, you take a few things you know about him, things that he might be vulnerable to. I think just focusing on leg kicks as a major part of any strategy against him is a good idea. He likes this sort of side-on boxer stance, and he likes to leap in from a long range, and he prioritizes, like most boxers do, protecting his chin. And often that means the legs kind of stay around as targets. And I think that's going to be there for Romero again, but the difficulty is, like, you can play a game where it's more difficult to choose your spots and kick if you sort of invite Whittaker to pressure. And you might be more effective. You might get more time to let your kicks go and to time your counters. You might basically slow the Whittaker roll. But if you're Yoel Romero, you're probably more effective at using these weapons when you're coming forward. Probably more effective at kicking and punching and, when you're backing the other guy up. But then you kind of fall into playing Whittaker's game. You might find yourself, like, following his initiative, even though you're the one pushing him back, because that is the kind of fight in which Whittaker feels that he's the matador, that he is the one actually leading the dance, even as he's retreating. So it's tricky to think of new developments. The thing is it was already such a close fight. It's not like it couldn't have gone another way with just one takedown being defended a little less effectively, or one good punch. And again, like, Romero's always so dangerous, and despite gassing in that fight, pretty obviously, he was throwing chingazos in the 5th round. He was still looking to take Whittaker's head off and got close with a few shots. So it's like, the troubling thing basing analysis on the first fight is that it wasn't that decisive. Like, it definitely felt like Whittaker.
It was clear, but it was not like it's not like this was Yoel Romero's high water mark.
Exactly. It definitely did not look like, oh, one of these guys is head and shoulders better than the other. It looked like two equal fighters in a fight that Robert Whittaker clearly won.
Yeah. I think you're right. I do think Whittaker, or I do think Romero would be well served to pressure just a little bit more. I don't think you want to. I don't know that you necessarily. Actually, I take that back. I don't know that you really want to pressure, but you want to have a little more control of the directionality of movement than you did in the first fight. So you're not trying to sell out to get Whittaker to the fence. I think that would be a mistake. But I do think you want to try to draw him out a little bit more to force the counter. Like, I think if you're Romero, you want to make him come to you. But you want to do so controlling the space a little bit more than he did in the first fight. Because where Romero got himself into a little trouble with the dynamic that he tried to play with, where, okay, I'm going to kick him and I'm going to force Whittaker to come to me, and then I'm going to work off of that. The problem was that very often happened with Romero's back relatively close to the fence and Whittaker's back to open space. So Romero is fast enough that if he had Whittaker not to the fence but like somewhat closer to the black line, then he could have used his footwork to find ways to turn Whittaker a little closer to the fence to find opportunities to land maybe 2, 3, 4 shots, right? So you don't have to pressure, but you want Whittaker with a little less margin for error and room to operate in open space. I don't know if that makes any sense. Do you get what I'm saying, Connor?
Yeah, kind of. That's the thing with this fight, Pat. It is very difficult to draw an exact distinction between the two ways to play any given situation. Like, I know what you mean. Like, the thing is like Whittaker's very comfortable pressuring too. So like, Romero wanting to make Whittaker think more about what he's going to do is a big key here, I think. That Romero just needs to have some kind of initiative. Whittaker needs to be made to react more. Because Whittaker's such a proactive fighter that even in the beginning when he was immediately countered and had his knee exploded, you could tell he immediately started calculating how to get that shot in, or how to take advantage of the fact that Romero was countering it every time with this same side kick to the knee. You could see him immediately start trying to circumnavigate or circumvent rather the responses of Romero by drawing those responses out. And Romero, that's the kind of game I think he's always going to lose closely, barring any kind of crazy finishing shot. That's the kind of game, if he finds himself playing it for more than 3 rounds, he's going to lose a close but clear decision, because a lot of this fight I think really does come down to who is tricking the other with their rhythm games more effectively. I know that's a very good way of phrasing it, but
so if you're Romero, I think those sequences against Luke Rockhold where Romero just blitzed him and got him back to, and just threw 3, 4, 5 shots, got him back to the fence and tried to take his head clean off.
Yeah.
He needs a couple of those here. He doesn't need to sell out to get them. He doesn't need to try to build everything to make sure that he gets 3 of those around, but he needs one of those around. He needs to give himself the opportunity to get there.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be, it's not like Robert Whittaker didn't get run into a straight line back into the fence by Derek Brunson a few times before he managed to solve it. Romero could do a lot with those opportunities if he were to just say, okay, this round I'm going to blitz early while I still have my energy, and I'm going to hold him in place or wear him down or whatever. I think Romero I think a big thing he needs to do here to change the outcome is to sort of build on the idea he had in the first fight, because he was confronted by the stamina problem, of course, when he was strategizing for Robert Whittaker. And his answer to that was, well, we're going to try to hold him down. We're going to make it easier on ourselves to sustain a certain level of activity by just basically riding out a few of the early minutes. Hold him in place, hold him against the fence, wear on him, whatever. That's going to be tough, because as incredibly athletic as Romero is, Whittaker is equally so, and younger, and seems to recover more quickly. And that's a big advantage for any young guy. And then you add to that the fact that Robert Whittaker, the reason this approach makes sense in the first place is that Whittaker is tremendously durable. I know Stephen Thompson knocked him out back at welterweight, but since he has rehydrated himself to 185, he has taken some vicious shots without any kind of issue. I mean, he took a spinning elbow from Clint Hester. He's been hit clean by a lot of very powerful hitters in this division. So Romero needs to avoid fighting his usual I could finish you at any moment style, because he's unlikely to do that against Robert Whittaker. But he's going to wear himself out if his solution is to wrestle him. I think Romero needs to invest heavily in the legs, in the body, in every single round he gets. Whatever sort of general overall strategy he decides to approach Whittaker with, I think he needs to forget about landing that one perfect shot to the head until it's time to sell out because the fight's almost over. I think he needs to go hard with knees and kicks and punches to the body and legs and really make that his focus, because Whittaker's all about defending the chin, and everything else forces him at least to think and puts him at least a half step behind for a few precious minutes. So
I think we may be overthinking just a little bit. So I think if you're Romero was very comfortable playing the long distance game in their first fight.
Sure.
Right. He did a really good job of it. That's how he exploded Whittaker's knee. What if he tried to? He just tried to keep it a little bit closer, right? Because Romero wanted that distance, right? And Whittaker wanted that distance, and so we got a lot of stuff at that particular distance. What if instead of trying to sell out to blitz him or trying to play that outside game, we saw Romero trying to get comfortable more at the range that he was against Rockhold?
Sure, but Pat, he did that in the last fight. It started to become more like that range in the 3rd and 4th rounds, and that's when Whittaker was landing vicious uppercuts from mid-range.
But that's when he was already a little bit tired.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And I think you're right about the instinct on the takedowns. If you're Romero, you want to use the takedowns, knowing what you know about the first fight. The threat of the takedown is tremendously useful to you, but you want to try to play off that to land shots rather than trying to hold him down. Or you want to try to do it to get him into the clinch. And rather than try to hit takedowns in the clinch, you're the bigger guy. You're the stronger guy. Just see if you can't hold him there for a little while and land a couple of shots. So I don't know. But if you're Whittaker, how would you approach this differently than you did the first time? We talked a lot about Romero, naturally, because he's the one who lost the fight, and so he's the one who has to adjust.
Yeah, if I'm Whittaker, I'd probably try to pressure more. I would probably try to. He had some pretty serious success there. The thing is like Romero's so comfortable doing nothing for 3 minutes at a time. I don't know if Whittaker could force him to chase if Romero doesn't want to. But if Romero does play a long range game again, he's looking for kicks. Better to try to push him back and poke him with the jab and make it uncomfortable for him to do so. I would probably try to get that going early and put a lot of feints on Romero. Like that, do a lot of the really tricky things you do to bridge distance without the other guy realizing you're doing it. Bounce into range, then you feint. You're close enough to hit, but you haven't let the shot go yet. You let it go a half second later. Like all of these tricky little timing things work really well when the other guy is being backed up by you.
Yeah, I think you want to try to force a quicker pace if you can. And I think that Whittaker would have tried to had he not gotten his knee injured.
Yeah.
Right. I think you want the pace you got in the 4th and 5th round, because you should be confident if you're Whittaker that you can maintain that in ways that Romero can't, even if he's not shooting those big takedowns.
Yeah.
So you want to try to draw out his explosive movements as much as possible. Even more so than he did in the first fight. I don't know. I mean, I thought Whittaker approached him about as well as he could have without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. I'm not sure Whittaker really needs to adjust.
Yeah, that's the thing is like he was just being Robert Whittaker, and it was close the whole time. There were a couple scary moments, but like it worked really well. And like he did all the things that you would want to do. The most remarkable thing about Whittaker in that fight is like here's like a 25-year-old guy, and he's the one in there pressuring to force the pace. He's the one in there adapting to an injury. He's the one consistently working the body. He looked like the slightly savvier fighter, despite being like a full 16 years younger than his opponent. So love Robert Whittaker, love Yoel Romero. We've been talking about this for like half an hour, but
well, it's because it's a great fight. It's so two of our favorite fighters, and there's a lot to dig into. There's a lot of meat.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're talking about Yoel Romero, right?
Both.
Okay.
A lot of meat in both of them. Meaty guys.
Meat's back on the menu, boys. So that was a Lord of the Rings reference, because Robert Whittaker is from New Zealand?
I believe he is, yeah.
All right.
Trains in Australia, but I believe he is from New Zealand, yeah.
All right, there we go. That was for you, Rob, Mr. Bobbert Knuckles. So, okay, I can't think of anything else until we let this fight wrap up. I could talk about it probably for another half hour without any difficulty, but we hope you guys are all as excited for this one as we are. It was a really tremendously interesting and compelling fight the first time, and God only knows what will happen this time around if another strange injury or something to heighten the drama, but just stylistically, it is a fascinating matchup between two of the best fighters on earth.
So real quick, Connor, what's your pick?
I am sticking with Robert Whittaker. I believe in his toughness. I believe in his ability to maintain composure against a destroyer like Romero better than just about any other Romero opponent can. And I think he will just essentially make the right decisions over the course of the fight. What about you?
Same. Very much the same. I may be the world's biggest Yoel Romero fan. I just think Whittaker is kind of a kryptonite matchup for him, where there's a kind of a limited array of things that you can do to beat Robert Whittaker, and I'm not sure that there's anybody out there who can beat him right now. And I just don't think that Romero's the dude.
Yeah. Even though he's like so close to him, he's as good as him. He's just not the dude to beat him.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a stylistic matchup thing. Can we stop for 1 second before we move on to think about how badly either one of these guys would have fucking murdered Michael Bisping? Like Bisping didn't want either of these guys. He never wanted those fights.
I don't blame him.
And you can't blame him for that.
No, I don't want to fight either of these guys. How could I possibly blame him for that?
No, and GSP too. GSP won the title and immediately wanted nothing to do with either one of them.
Yeah.
And you don't blame either Bisping or GSP for that. Like, fuck that. Who wants to fight Yoel Romero, man? That's insane.
Yeah, or Whittaker. Whittaker kind of like silently owned GSP the way GSP used to own people by just being really nice and polite to him and respecting him, and GSP still had to look him in the eyes and be like, I'm not the champion anymore because I don't want to fight you.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would pick either of these guys to knock out GSP at this point.
Yeah. Well, again, two of the best fighters on the planet, so what's not to like?
Fuck, this is a good fight.
With all of that being said, let's move on. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the co-main event, welterweights Rafael dos Anjos and Colby Covington. Again, we are hoping for something that will make us all feel better about the fact that Colby Covington continues to exist. We'll get to that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
I really dislike Colby Covington.
It's what he wants, but also you get the feeling that he hates it. You know what I mean? Like he's so resentful.
Yeah, he wants to be Chael Sonnen, but Chael was eventually loved for his heel act.
Yeah. Chael's charismatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Colby is.
Every time Chael talks, you definitely think about all of the evil things of which he's capable, but you don't assume he was just like smearing his boogers on the underside of the desk. You know what I mean? It's a totally different dynamic. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. The co-main event is before us. Rafael dos Anjos continues his run towards the welterweight title with a matchup now. If he wins here, it'll be his fourth straight win in this division. Will surely line him up for a shot at the champion, Tyron Woodley, a shot which he may have already gotten had Woodley not had to undergo a surgery after dos Anjos beat former welterweight champ Robbie Lawler. And for this fight, he is taking on Colby Covington. Pat, who is Colby Covington?
Well, aside from being a C- troll and presumably a C- student as well, I think Covington.
Savage.
Covington is a former NCAA All-American wrestler. He is a tremendously gifted takedown artist and defender of takedowns, a born grinder, a willing bomber. Like, he is perfectly willing to let his hands go and is not especially afraid about getting hit back. He's also a guy with some rather serious holes that he's still got to figure out, which might be holes that Rafael dos Anjos can exploit.
Yeah, he's also probably the only YouTube commenter who, if you actually agree to meet him for a fight, would probably beat you.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, I just got to say, I was rooting pretty hard for Fabricio Werdum's boomerang in that particular matchup. Yeah. I mean, I find his shtick to be just fucking insufferable, but he's a pretty good prospect. He's an interesting prospect, and he has thus far passed pretty much every test that's been put in front of him. I mean, I don't think getting guillotined by Warley Alves, a guy who's got a really great guillotine, in the first round of that fight really says all that much about Covington's weaknesses. You know, that's a prospect loss.
Yeah, well, Covington is a skilled fighter, but we talked, recently about referencing fighters like Mackenzie Dern, among others, where the process really sort of overshadows the specific techniques required to make that process work. And Covington is a very process-driven fighter. It is all about like the momentum of being able to go from one thing to another, and it's really all about the pace. Whether it's on the feet, and if it is there, it's usually ugly when it comes to Colby Covington's striking, or the wrestling, which also isn't as pretty as some other really technical wrestlers like Kamaru Usman, for example. But no matter what's happening, if Covington feels that he's in a position to push for something else, to push for one technique and then another, and then another, and then another, chain wrestling, combination punching, whatever, a brawl or a scramble, that's the kind of fight his game is built to create.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's exactly the dynamic to understand about Covington's game, is that he does a really excellent job of putting himself in position to win the kinds of fights that he excels in.
Yeah.
And those are either really grimy, grindy fights in the clinch and in wrestling exchanges, or on the feet, really quick-paced striking exchanges that play to his durability.
He has a kind of style that if he were even remotely more likable, I would really like him, because like he is the ultimate hashtag embrace the grind kind of fighter. It's not about being more technical or faster or stronger or anything. I mean, I guess he relies on his durability a bit when it comes to striking exchanges, but really it is about creating the kind of fight he needs. So the question here, I think the big question, the sort of obvious question when it comes to a fight with Rafael dos Anjos is, can Colby Covington create the kind of fight he needs? Dos Anjos, well known as a very effective pressure fighter, but we've also seen hints from a few of his past fights, most notably the one against Tony Ferguson, that when he cannot pressure, when he is forced to stop pressuring and go on the back foot, Dos Anjos is himself fairly neutered as well. So can Covington pressure Dos Anjos, whether that means like inviting a sort of brawl on the feet or literally walking him back and going for his hips over and over? It seems like that'll be the key to him potentially winning this matchup. Yeah,
I think from a pure skills perspective, this is a fight Dos Anjos should win. From a pure, from the perspective of what is each guy going to try to do and how is the other equipped to deal with that, I think you actually kind of have to give Covington a little bit of an edge here, because Covington is going to press forward. Yep. Covington, despite the kind of like sheer ugliness of how it looks when he throws strikes, has pretty good footwork. He's got pretty good pressure footwork, and he does a pretty good job of backing you up. And when it comes to getting in on your hips, he is absolutely relentless. If there is anything that Rafael dos Anjos has struggled with over the years, it is technically sound and relentless wrestling. That has been the big kind of Achilles heel to Dos Anjos' game, and you can track mostly over the course of his career, like those are the guys he's lost to, are guys who can move him, who can push him back to the fence and just chain takedowns together.
Mm-hmm. You almost get the sense that Dos Anjos' style is like built on what he doesn't want to happen to him. Where it's like he learned to fight the way he fights now because those are the things that work against him. Grinding, staying in his face, putting the pressure, combinations of strikes. And if it's almost like he feels, if I can get this fight for myself, the other guy can't have it. But the reason I feel that way is because whenever the other guy does get the fight, it's obvious how profoundly uncomfortable Dos Anjos is with that. And you're right. I have no doubt that Colby Covington is going to try to force a nonstop pressure-oriented kind of fight. It's just, that's the way he operates. I don't know that he's, he might move off the back foot and everything, but you give him a chance, you throw something and it doesn't land, or you hit him clean or whatever, you give him any kind of opening and he will come back with 4 horribly sloppy punches and then go into your hips and then will be constantly switching double to one side, body lock the other side, just constantly forcing you to adjust to the way in which you're sprawling to him. It sounds like we might be disappointed. It sounds like we might be a little heartbroken because Covington, as hittable as he is probably gonna, if he can survive, he's probably gonna end up getting a kind of fight that he usually gets. And barring the Warley Alves guillotine, nobody wins those fights against Colby Covington.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're underselling Dos Anjos as an outfighter just a little bit at this point.
Okay.
Covington is not the master of pressure. He's pretty good at it, but is not like, I mean, I wouldn't put him on Dos Anjos' level in terms of being a guy who really excels at cutting you off and backing you up.
It's really, again, it's not about the technique, it's about the process. It's the fact that he's putting pressure on you more than it is that it's good pressure.
The pressure, I would say it's good pressure. It's not great pressure.
Sure.
We have seen much better. I think more so than a lot of guys who use kicks to cut it off, Covington uses those looping ass punches he throws. To kind of restrict your lateral movement. There's a method to his particular brand of kind of sloppy madness. As far as Dos Anjos' outfighting is concerned, we've seen some real improvements from that. He is much more comfortable fighting. First, he got comfortable fighting in open space, and now he's gotten a little more comfortable fighting off the back foot. It's still not what he feels great doing, but we saw him looking better at that against Robbie Lawler than he had in previous fights.
And for much as I portrayed the Tony Ferguson fight as the one where it was clear that he needed to pressure, he also, like, that was a fight in which he did show new abilities to fight without being able to pressure. His jab, really, like, that was one of the landmark moments in the development of the Dos Anjos jab, I think, was that fight.
Yeah, and he looked great with the jab against Lawler.
Yes.
He showed off better footwork when pressured. Like he's clearly mastered the 1 step back, 2 steps to the side type of thing. Like just through, I think, rote repetition.
Yeah.
In terms of Dos Anjos' training situation for this fight, he's been working with Jason Perillo. Jason Perillo knows how to train out fighters. You know, like that's like he's one of the best in the game at doing that. We know Jason Perillo excels at teaching footwork. We know he excels at teaching. You could see that in Dos Anjos' last fight in his head movement and his defense. Dos Anjos' defense was always functional, and now it's excellent. It is very hard to hit him cleanly. And he's much more comfortable countering in the pocket, even when he doesn't have the advantage of the fence behind you. So, I mean, I don't know that it's a wash. You know, that Covington is just going to get exactly the kind of fight that he wants. I think he could mostly get that, but I really think unless Dos Anjos just works Covington's legs with kicks whenever he gets the opportunity to do so to slow Covington down, and unless he manages to really land something that hurts, like I just think he's going to get kind of dragged into that. It really is kind of a coin flip fight because I could see Dos Anjos getting that kind of thing here. But then I could also really see him getting just kind of grinded. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, like, Covington's he doesn't have a lot of the advantages that other welterweights would have over Dos Anjos. He's not huge for this division. He's not tremendously, like, he doesn't really stand out in any athletic sense. He's not really powerful. He doesn't have a size advantage in that way where it's like, oh, he's a big enough hitter to hang at 170. So I don't know, like the thing that I really like about the most recent portion of Dos Anjos' career is that he's doing what great long-term fighters always do, which is he is continuing to develop his game. Dos Anjos isn't even just honing in the way that we often talk about it, where fighters get to a point they're not learning new skills anymore. Dos Anjos is truly still like evolving and experimenting with new ways of fighting and trying to fill out his game and explore new avenues. And the pairing with Perillo is the greatest evidence of that. I agree with you. Like we've talked about this before, obviously, but every single facet of Dos Anjos' boxing was sharper than it ever had been in the Robbie Lawler fight. His head movement, his footwork, his combination punching, his jab, his feinting, like everything was keyed up. Perillo, with just one camp, had clearly had an effect on Dos Anjos' skills. And this could be the kind of fight where, by virtue of being a good athlete, and by virtue of being very, very experienced, and by virtue of having sharper skills, Dos Anjos could hang around in a Colby Covington kind of fight. It's not like Colby Covington, again, his pressure's not that good, technically speaking. It's not like he cuts off the cage exceptionally well. It's not like he measures the distance exceptionally well. It's not like he literally ever throws a single feint. It is just like you have to deal with him constantly being there, trying to do something.
Yeah, he's relentless. You can't, like, it is very difficult to put Covington off what he wants to do. Nobody thus far has been able to really get Covington off what he wants to do.
But you still get all kinds of opportunities to do stuff to him because of how many gaps there are in his way of pressuring.
Yeah, that's true. Like, actually, you know, I think I'm going with Dos Anjos.
This is where I'm leading us to. So I'm gonna let you steal the pick out from under me first.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think what you pointed to there, I think it comes down to kind of experience and professionalism. Right. To the extent that, not that Colby Covington is not a professional. I'm sure he does what he's supposed to do in the gym. But Dos Anjos, you know he's going to be in condition. We have seen him fight 5 hard rounds before.
Yeah.
We have never really seen Dos Anjos get broken in a fight. Covington's game is designed to break you.
Right.
What happens if Covington plays that game? He eats the shots. We're now late into the third round. There's no final bell coming, right? And Dos Anjos is there. Like, he's eaten some shots, but he's put in work to the legs and the body. We now get into the fourth and the fifth round, and Covington's pressure is coming a little slower.
Well, we're looking at 3 rounds here, right?
No, it's a 5-round fight.
Is it? It's the co-main event.
It's an interim title fight.
Oh shit! It is,
isn't it?
For a completely meaningless title? No, I think you're right. You're right.
It's an interim belt. Yeah, it's a 5-round fight.
You're right. So yeah, that kind of makes me feel better. Like, Dos Anjos' conditioning is one of his strongest weapons. He is, as we have said, the professional. It should be his nickname, to be honest. Yeah. It's the only interesting thing about him as a person is that he is profoundly professional. He takes his business very seriously.
He is the poster child for aging well in this sport.
Hell yeah.
And for changing things up when they need to get changed up, for never sticking around longer than never overstaying his welcome in any one training situation once he feels like he's gotten what he needs to out of it. Like, he really is.
He doesn't stagnate. You know, he's always like, he treats this like a job that he wants to get promoted at. He wants to do very good at his job. So here's the thing, relevant to what you were just saying, like the Colby Covington, fighting Colby Covington because he's relentless, and that is the thing that really defines him, is his relentlessness. It's like fighting John Lineker, where you cannot hope to put him off by scaring him or by hurting him or whatever. Like, his response to all of those things, even if he does feel those feelings in his heart of hearts, his response is going to be to double down on being relentless. He's just not going to be shook. But you could probably frustrate a guy like Colby Covington, and you can coexist with him in his kind of fight. And it's like, if you're fighting John Lineker and the consequences of fighting him are not, he's going to hit me in the ribs so hard that I thank him for hitting him in the chin and making me forget about the rib shot a second later. The consequence is instead, he's going to get into my hips. You know, he's going to clinch with me, and actually I have some pretty good options in that phase. And in the meantime, am I good enough? Is Dos Anjos good enough to work off a jab, to get in a kick here or there? Like, again, there's so many holes in the way that Covington does pressure that you can pressure him even in spots, even when he's fighting exactly the fight he wants. He'll still take a step back. He'll still leave his chin out there. All of his responses come super wide. I don't know. I just feel like this is the right moment in Colby Covington's career where a super experienced and sharp fighter like Dos Anjos, one who will just mind his P's and Q's for the whole of the fight, can get a decision over him, can just sort of teach him a lesson about fighting like a damn professional, son. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm here with that, because I think you saw in that Maia fight some of the weaknesses of Covington's game. If he's getting the kind of fight that he wants,
right? Exactly. Because it's just about, I've got the fight I want. Now I've won. Now I'm Colby Covington. I just have to wait for the fight to end.
Yeah, no adjustments. If you have good pocket footwork is going to be enough to create some pretty tremendous opportunities. And speaking of the grindy kind of fight, one of the areas in which Dos Anjos has really improved has been his clinch game. Like, if he can get Covington off of his hips and stand him up, that looks much more like a 50-50 fight in the clinch. It that may be where Covington wants to be, because if he's in the clinch, then he has access to Dos Anjos' hips. But you can get fucked up in the clinch by Rafael Dos Anjos these days. Like, those knees are nasty. He's got a nice little elbow game too. So I think I'm going to go with Dos Anjos by 5-round decision. I think 48-47 or 49-46 sounds about right.
Yeah, sorry, I was just daydreaming, thinking of Dos Anjos throwing a 900 punch combo like he did against Robbie Lawler, but against Colby Covington. It's
fingers crossed, my friend.
Oh, I need to see that. So come on, Dos Anjos. You know, there's probably some element of heart influencing my pick here, but I have to agree. Like, I really think like Colby Covington could be a really nasty matchup for Dos Anjos, given another year or given the experience of a loss like this one could be. Yeah. Like, to know, okay, maybe I need to think about the particulars of the fight and not just focus all of my efforts on getting my kind of fight. I think Dos Anjos is crafty enough to win that kind of fight. So, yeah, going with RDA. Hope I'm not heartbroken, but you never know. When we come back, Holly Holm is taking on Megan Anderson. We'll get to that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands for segment number 3. Why don't we talk about the women's featherweights now? Holly Holm, Megan Anderson. First of all, I don't know if we've already mentioned this in the cold intro, but Megan Anderson, that's the correct way to pronounce this name. That is extremely upsetting to me.
That's some Australian-ass bullshit.
It's just white, Pat. It's not even Australian. It's just extremely, like, Megan is a name you can only have if you are a bogan or a sorority sister.
Isn't that a joke from Key and Peele?
What's somebody named Megan?
Isn't the like stereotypical white girl in a Key and Peele skit named Megan?
Probably.
She is. That is some elite caucasity, and I suppose Australian is some pretty elite caucasity.
Yep.
So, what do you make of this?
Well, you know how they point to Megan Anderson as evidence, like, oh, this featherweight division isn't a complete wasteland. It's one of those things where, like, Megan Anderson is obviously the positive of the featherweight division. She's like the other interesting element floating around out there beyond Cyborg, and I guess Holly Holm is now officially a featherweight. But when you look at her you frame her as a positive, it kind of makes you feel worse about the division, because there is still a gulf between the kinds of things someone like Megan Anderson can do and the kind of shit that Cyborg does. Yeah, please, Pat. Don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, I watched Anderson's last fight with Charmaine Tweet. Cyborg would have smashed Charmaine Tweet given that same matchup. And Anderson had a shocking amount of trouble. She still dominated the fight for all intents and purposes. She still pretty much had her way. But, you know, like, not having the drive to finish a takedown that you're completely in on, even though your opponent doesn't sprawl, not moving your head whatsoever, even when you're throwing a 5 or 6 punch combination in the pocket. There were just a lot of gaps where it's like, okay.
The reason you felt disappointed about the Charmaine Tweet thing is because we did watch Cyborg destroy her, and it took 46 seconds.
Right, exactly. Whereas Anderson's, it's not that she doesn't have good skills. Offensively, I really like a lot of her striking. She's got a great high kick, and she's got some really sharp boxing to set it up. But pretty much every other aspect of her game leaves something significant to be desired.
Yeah. Yeah, so in thin divisions, you're always going to be grading prospects on some kind of curve.
Right.
Because there just is not the depth of talent necessary for you to, like, faithfully rank fighters, like, where you can't really nitpick too much just because you're so desperate for anybody to be there.
Right. Heavyweight has different standards. We know this.
Exactly. Like, what makes for an elite prospect at heavyweight is much different than what makes for an elite prospect at lightweight or featherweight or bantamweight. Now, Megan Anderson is a fantastic featherweight prospect. If you were judging her by the standards of a different division, you would be somewhat less stoked about her, and I think that's a totally fair thing to say. In the context of this division, you got to be stoked that there's anybody who's as talented as she is. I really like her angles in the pocket. She's trained by James Krause. So if you've seen James Krause's game, which is a lot of shifting stances, a lot of long straight punches, a lot of kind of tricky angles in tight. You're trying to keep your opponent on the end of your reach, but you're trying to throw a very high volume of punches there. Then if you've seen that game, then you know what Megan Anderson is trying to do. The question I think here is, how does that match up with a real dedicated outfighter who's not going to give Anderson the kind of engagement that she wants?
Right. Because the dynamic that I sort of see in this matchup is that you're right. Like, the one thing that really stands out about Anderson is that she's very good at using her length, and she has a real knack for like connecting on her punches at the perfect point. She gets really solid extension. She'll put like 4 or 5 straight punches in a row together really nicely. The problem is that her tendency, because her striking is so much better than most of the women she fights, she has, whether she wants to or not, fallen into a habit of pressuring. It's just how she gets to her opponents, and I don't think she has enough like depth of movement or feinting or she's not really tricky enough to fight a sort of neutral outfighting battle with the likes of Holly Holm, even if she is in that kind of fight much more dangerous than Holly Holm. And so what's going to happen is she's going to go after Holly Holm and give Holly the only kind of fight in which she is actually dangerous.
Yes. Megan Anderson is going to run herself onto Holly Holm's left hand over and over again.
Yes.
In this fight. That is not an unwinnable fight for Anderson, because Anderson really likes to pressure. She likes to dictate the range and the space of the cage. That is much easier to do in Invicta, which is a smaller cage. True. Against the caliber of striker that she was fighting in Invicta. And it's going to be much more difficult in a full-sized UFC cage against somebody who is really good at getting out of the way when you come after them.
That specific kind of fight is exactly what Holly Holm excels at.
Yes, this is, and where we have seen Holm struggle is when opponents have not been willing to give her that kind of fight. Like the very patient, methodical approach that Chris Cyborg took was awful for Holly Holm. The same kind of deal with Germaine de Randamie, that very patient, kind of process-driven pressure where she would drive her back, let Holm throw, counter her, not giving her the kind of on-rushing thing that's going to allow Holm to play Matador. Yeah. I think that's going to be a real problem for her.
It makes a lot of sense to pressure Holm, but you still have to make her feel like she has to put herself out there first.
Exactly. You want the game to play against Holm is the aggressive counterpunching game. Yeah. That's the game you want to play against her. You want to hold the initiative, but you want to make force Holm to make the first move. I don't think that Anderson, based on what we've seen from her, is capable of doing that yet. Now, we haven't seen her fight in a year and a half. She's been out for a variety of better and worse reasons. So it's possible that she has developed those skills, but I don't see anything on the tape that makes me think that she's got that.
Yeah, and in a lot of the areas where she falls short of Holm, where she kind of fails to meet the Holly Holm mark, is just like the subtle veteran shit. Like just the comfort that Holly Holm has because she knows from long experience of throwing hands with people that after they throw this hand, it's probably going to be this one next. Holm is not like a great defensive fighter. She has a lot of the same inherent problems as Megan Anderson, but she relies a lot on experience, I think. Unlike, she sort of seems to treat fights as like an aggregate where, like most of the time this is going to work, so I'll pick 1 or 2 responses to this situation and then get back to my kind of fight. Whereas like when Anderson's pressuring, even when she's getting the fight she wants, she doesn't seem to have any sense of what kind of shot might be coming back at her. Or when she...
I think...
Yeah, it's experience.
This is something we've talked about a lot over the course of this show, but like how much defense is a product of experience in MMA. Much more so than in boxing where generally you're getting some defensive skills taught to you from day one. The only thing... for the most part, that teaches fighters defense in MMA is just the experience of being in fights where you have skilled people trying to hit you.
And Holm has had a very long fighting career. I just think those little things will make a really substantial difference. Where it's like Anderson may be getting the pressure, but she's going to be frustrated very quickly when she realizes like it's just not working out the way it normally does. And Holly Holm her game never falls apart. She's super durable physically and mentally. She's just going to keep being Holly Holm the whole time.
Yeah, if you come in, you can trust that Holly Holm is going to have the right game plan to win a fight. She's not a great adjuster, but she is fantastic at following the plan that she's given.
Yeah, true.
And when you have a fairly basic opponent in the way that Megan Anderson, as a relatively inexperienced fighter, is fairly basic, like Holm will have every tool that she needs going into that fight to take Anderson out of her preferred kind of mode.
Every time you say Megan, I just can't get over it. We're both picking Holly Holm by the sounds of it. I think she'll win this one fairly comfortably. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, Anderson's got long arms. She's gonna pop Holly's head back a couple of times, but I think she is just going to fall into chasing around a more experienced striker, and that's the long. Not to mention, by the way, Holly Holm is going to hold her against the fence for like at least 4 minutes of this fight.
Absolutely. So, as a fact check, yes, Megan is the character, the stereotypical white girl character that Jordan Peele played in Key and Peele, to the Andre of Keegan-Michael Key. Yeah. Just wanted to double check on that. Yes, that is correct.
Now we know. All right, well, that's pretty much it from us on UFC 225. If all goes according to plan, all of these fights will actually be happening, because big cards like this have a nasty tendency of being hit by injury bugs just when you start to allow yourself to believe that everything's going to be okay. So fingers crossed, this delicious looking card is still going to be juicy and succulent by the time we actually get to it. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Find us on social media. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman and myself at Boxing Bush, both of those on Twitter.com, of course, Facebook.com/PatrickWymanMMA or /ConnorRebushMMA. And, check out our various works at various outlets and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, check out our Patreon as well. Might be a couple of bonus fights being discussed for this card on there. So keep your eyes peeled and pay attention to that. Until next time, if you guys came here for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.